Welcome to our summer Bible study. My prayer for this study is to help you stay in the Word a little bit more as you go about your business this summer and all the different places that our summers can take us. We're getting towards the end of it. It's Fair Week this week in August, July, whatever it is, of 2024. And so each one of these studies is going to be independent of all the others, which is kind of outside of our normal MO. But if this is your first time here, jump on in and let's get into this. Failure is kind of a universal thing, isn't it? Like, there's an entire industry out there that exists based on recording and sharing other people's failures. I mean, there's people who make good livings doing just that, who just share the ways other people fail because sometimes it's funny. And, an industry like that wouldn't exist if there wasn't demand for it. And there absolutely is demand for it because it's universal. Like I said, failure is a universal thing. Every one of us has experienced it in some form or another in a funny way sometimes, right? Like we've all slipped and fallen on ice in front of everybody around us. We've all said, I love you, getting off the phone to somebody who you wouldn't normally say that to. It would be awkward, you know what I'm talking about? Like, we all make mistakes. We all dance terribly thinking nobody was looking, or sang horribly thinking nobody could hear, and lo and behold, somebody could hear, and somebody had a camera, and they were recording, right? We all have experienced failure, and the thing about failure is it's a good thing. It's the best teacher that you can have. I mean, you can have success in all kinds of things that you try, but if you don't understand why it was successful, it really doesn't help you. But failure, it's usually pretty obvious. This is why that failed. And if you're somebody who cares, you're going to try to find out why it failed, even if it's not apparently obvious immediately. We each take thousands of steps every single day, and you don't think about a single one of them. But the one where you slip and fall, that's the one you remember, and you remember not to take a step there again. We learn more from mistakes and errors than we do when things go perfectly. And the Bible understands this. The Bible, being the book of truth that it is, it shares the failures of the people we're supposed to look up to. It doesn't just share them, it embraces them. Most religions, most governments, most companies, most businesses, they try to hide the errors of the people they want you to buy into, the things they want you to buy into. They try to hide them away, make sure nobody can see. This is their dirty little secrets, right? They try to hide away those people they want you admiring their failures. But the Bible doesn't do that. The people that it holds up as, hey, these are people's examples you should follow, it holds them up crystal clear for all the world to see so that we can learn on one hand from their mistakes, but also so we can realize that they're simply human too, that they make mistakes same as we do, that just because they are a hero of faith, somebody that we should be admiring, doesn't mean they started any different than us. They don't have any special DNA or superpowers than we do. They're just people. But people who understood to trust in something bigger than themselves, to trust in a God who cares. Today I want to look at a lesser known hero of faith, and it's even questionable to call them a hero of faith, but they definitely teach us a lesson in their failure. We're going to be in the book of Judges this week. If you're unfamiliar with the book of Judges, think of it kind of like the book of failures. Like, that's pretty much all it's in it. The people of Israel, they're in a period after they've mostly conquered the promised land that God commanded them to, but they didn't have kings yet. And so they were caught in the cycle of failure. They would be faithful to the covenant that God made with them. They would live the way he commanded them to. Then they would get comfortable, and they would get lazy, and they would stop being so faithful. And those little sins became big sins until eventually they were completely unfaithful to the covenant God had made with them, which brought down the consequences of that covenant, to which the people suffered, in which they repented, and then God would raise up a judge to lead people out from under the consequences and back to a place of covenant faithfulness. And this cycle would continue on and on and on and on throughout the book of Judges. They would be faithful, they'd get comfortable, they would wonder, they would fail, they would suffer consequences, they'd repent, God would raise up a judge to restore them. They would have redemption through the judge, and then they would be faithful again. It's kind of the cycle of sin, if you really think about it, but that's another lesson for a different day. But the judges that we see that God raises up in each one of these cycles, they're the who's who of people you wouldn't pick to be a leader in the people of Israel. They're oddballs, they're outcasts, they're weaklings, they're weirdos. They're not the normal types of leaders. They're not the type you and I would write down all of their qualities and their characteristics if we were trying to hire them for this job. They're not the people that we would, interview first. But with God's power, they're able to do incredible things. God equips them for the mission that he has called them to. And the judge we're looking at today is a guy named Jephthah. There's a whole lot of in his name. But Jephthah, Jephthah. Jephthah came from an unlikely place, right? He was the son of a really rich guy named Gilead. The problem was Jephthah was the son of an affair, basically. His mother was a prostitute. And in their society, we're talking probably around 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, give or take. This is a tribal society where legitimacy of birth mattered, right? Today, it doesn't matter nearly as much, if everybody has step siblings, basically. Like, nobody has a whole family just about that's just everybody's full biological mom and dad same. Like, it just doesn't happen anymore. But back then, it was a big deal because Gilead's other sons that came from his actual legitimate wife, they got everything at the end of their life, at the end of Gilead's life. They got the inheritances. They got all the privileges. Jephthah was basically left on his own and kind of treated as this shameful thing to be ignored. And so when it came time for Gilead to grow up and to find his place, or not Gilead, Jephthah to grow up and find his place in the world, he's basically left to do it on his own. He had no help. He had no support. And this was a time where there were no social safety nets. He wasn't educated. He wasn't given privileges or help from the government. He was on his own. And so he did the only thing he knew to do. He became a violent man. He went to a place called Tob, T-O-B, and he started to recruit a gang of fellows. That's what it says, a worthless fellows. That's a direct quote from Scripture. And he built up this gang, and they became basically tyrants, more or less, tyrants that are faithful to God. I don't know how you want to describe them, but they were violent people. That's basically the gist of what they did. And so what do violent people do? They go to war. And so while he was in Tob with his gang, the people turned from God. I mean, it was a slow fade, but it was this cycle. This is the book of Judges, and God allowed the people of the nation of Ammon to attack. Long story short, the elders of Israel asked Jephthah to lead the people against the Ammonites. And before he does, he makes a massively boneheaded move, right? You got to remember, yes, Jephthah was somebody who grew up rough. He was somebody who didn't have the privileges. He didn't have help from his family, but he was faithful to God. He trusted in God. Yes, he was a man of violence, but he was a man who was faithful. He made a bonehead move. He faced a battle, and so he decided he was just going to throw everything he had on the table, and he makes a promise to God. We find it in Judges chapter 11, verses 30 and 31. It reads, Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will give the Ammonites into my hand, God, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. Basically, what he was saying was if God gives him victory in the battle, in the war against the Ammonites, whenever he goes home, whatever greets him at the door, he'll willingly give up to God. He will willingly sacrifice. Now, I've made some pretty short-sighted decisions in my life, but this is really short-sighted. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I used to get home from work and we had a dog, the dog was usually the first thing to meet me there. So maybe that's what Jephthah was thinking. Maybe he thought, you know what, my chickens and my goats, they're the first things to say hi. So, I'll sacrifice the goat. Sorry, I love the goat, but, it is what it is, right? I'm willing to make that sacrifice. I don't know. Maybe that's what he was thinking. But nowadays, the first thing to greet me when I get home is my kids and my wife, because we don't have a dog. But still, it's like, even if we still had a dog, I would never make this risk. I would never take this risk. Why would he do this? And so Jephthah makes the promise. He goes off to war, and God gives him victory. And then he comes back. He remembers his promise to God. And as he is walking in, wouldn't you know it, his daughter, his only child, is what greets him. And she comes out the door singing and dancing and singing songs about how great her daddy is. She's a teenager at this point. But instantly, as soon as he saw her, he ripped his clothes and he wept. He knew he had to give her up. He told her what he had done, and so she began to weep now. And then she asked her father to let her go into the mountains with her friends for 2 months so she could weep and just process this and grieve everything that she's going to lose. Now, in the Bible, it doesn't explicitly say what happens to her. But most Bible scholars agree that when she returns from those 2 months away, she wasn't sacrificed as an animal was, for a couple reasons. Number one, the Bible is crystal clear. God hates human sacrifice, and he hates explicitly child sacrifice. He hates both of those things explicitly. He says so himself. He does not approve of those ever under any circumstances. When God told the people of Israel to conquer the promised land, there were a lot of cities that he devoted to destruction. Every man, woman, and child would be destroyed because they were so evil. If they were allowed to exist beyond that, they would be a plague on every people around them, which they were, because some of those people did survive beyond, and they did continue on these horrible practices. And one of the ones that God cites as being the reason for their destruction is child sacrifice. And God is no hypocrite. So he's not going to demand that those people be destroyed and then command his own people to do the exact same thing for the reason that he was calling them to destroy them. That would make God a hypocrite, and it would make him evil. That's not what most likely would have happened. So most scholars believe that when Jephthah's daughter returned from her 2-month trip, she was given to the priests as sort of a precursor to what we would think of as a monk. She would live a monastic style life, serving at the tabernacle with the priests. And the reason that she grieved so much was not just that she had to leave home. It's that she was a virgin and she would always be a virgin. And it's not that she was grieving not having sex, maybe, but really it was that she was never going to have kids. This was a tribal society. The heartbeat of every man and woman in these types of societies has always been to have kids. This was her basically saying every dream she had in her life was now gone, because that's what she wanted. Almost every woman from this time and period and place and culture, they wanted children more than anything. And now, because of her father's mistake, it was being denied her. She could never have children. She could never return home. She only could serve the priests. The point is, the regular, happy life that she thought she was going to live, it was now gone forever. And the other part of this was Jephthah had no other children. This was his only child. So the fail is that Jephthah didn't look before he leapt. He didn't think about the consequences before he took action. And most of the time, our decisions can seem like they aren't going to have any real consequences. Most of the time, they can seem rather minimal and have minor consequences. Most of the decisions we make are just regular humdrum activities. What clothes are we going to wear today? What are we going to eat for lunch? What road are we going to take to work? The back road or the highway? Things like that have such minor consequences if we make the wrong choice. But you see, making those kind of decisions over and over and over, not paying attention to them, they can allow bad decisions to creep in. They can allow us to lull ourselves into not paying attention to when we do have a serious decision to make. We mess it up. We miss it. We make it without thinking. This is also how sin creeps up in our lives. We become tolerant of a little sin. We don't pay attention to it. It's just minor. But we allow it to grow. We make the same mistake over and over again until eventually we're in deep water. What Jephthah teaches us is to pay attention to our decisions. Jephthah was making a bold promise, but I'm sure he didn't think through before he made that one, because no parent risks a kid that they love, and he clearly loved his daughter. Now, the other side of this is not to say that there's never a time where we have to just think on our feet and make decisions without thinking, where we don't have time to think. Ask any cop, infantryman, firefighter, medic, nurse, ER nurse, or anyone else tasked with making high-stakes decisions under a ton of pressure with having no time to think. Sometimes you do just have to make decisions and go from leap to leap to leap. Those situations exist. What about then? Are we supposed to just stop? Or are we supposed to just let things happen because we need to stop and think about it? And obviously not. But this is where your training kicks in, right? There's a saying that goes around in military and police and fire and high stakes jobs, high pressure jobs, that you will default to your training when your thinking goes away. Because when you get in those situations, you don't have time to think. And so whatever you've trained to do, that's what you'll end up doing. You will default to that. If you've trained as a firefighter to search, to be calm, to be able to operate when you can't see, when you can't feel, when you can't hear, if you've been trained to do that, you will default to that training. But if you haven't, you'll panic and you'll do whatever your training is. As Christians, we have to keep up with our training. 1 Timothy 4:8 says, "For while bodily training is of some value, godliness is of value in every way, as it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come." What Paul is saying is, as Christians, we have to stay in the Word. We have to raise up our godliness. What is godliness? Godliness is becoming God-like. Not that we get God's powers or we are little gods, but rather we become like God himself, like Jesus himself. The word Christian means Christ-like. We have to really pour into our apprenticeship as disciples. We have to learn what Jesus knows. We have to do what Jesus did. We have to become like Jesus. We have to study like Jesus. We have to train ourselves to be like Jesus. Because you'll be in situations where you have to leap. You can't think. Whether it's somebody is rude to you in public, somebody is angry towards you, or whether it's somebody cuts you off in traffic, or whatever it is, you'll be under a situation where you're going to react. And if you haven't trained yourself to react the way Christ would, you're going to default to your best training. So remember the story of Jephthah and his daughter. That when we go about our lives, we have to train ourselves to be like Christ. We need to think before we act as often as we can and train ourselves to make those right decisions when we can't. I hope this study was helpful to you, that it was encouraging to you, and just encourages you as you go about your summer. If you have any questions, reach out. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.